What is going on, Space Mob? Welcome back to another episode of the AST Space Odyssey podcast. Thank you for tuning in and following us on all platforms at AST Space Odyssey. Also, shout out Space Mob member Red Rum for making these sweet shirts. I got my Catsy torching the shorts shirt. I think it's appropriate with the recent stock move from 22 to now about 45. We have a very exciting episode today where we're going to be covering a ton of cool topics with none other than the legend Anpanman. Once again, we cover kind of the recent military use cases, the upcoming launches, the stock analysis, and where we think it's going to go from here. And then we do a Q&A where we dive into some specifics on the tech, compare it to Starlink, talk about some of the business financials, and then some more. Very excited for this episode. Always a pleasure talking with Anpanman. Thank you guys for submitting these questions. We plan to do more with him. So if you ever have questions for him or me, feel free to submit them. We have some great episodes planned for the future, and we're just going to keep ramping up this podcast because as we see, this company is growing and executing at an insane pace right now. So every week we have more to cover, and we hope to interview a bunch more people that are in the stock or direct ties to AST. And going forward, I hope you enjoy. And now let's just dive right in. Kind of starting out with kind of the biggest one since we talked last, I really think kind of the recent testing with the military is just something that's massive and kind of underlooked. I kind of want to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so we got some news that AST SpaceMobile has been through their one of their prime contractor partners, Fairwinds, recently conducted successful testing with various branches of the U.S. military, and this was in through one of the organizations called Future 6G, I believe. And so I think this is in particular helping the battlefield communications between warfighters and the command centers. And so that encompasses not only individual troops, but different assets on the battlefield, like whether it's drones, tanks, other vehicles, but also ships too. So assets that are on the water. But that was a pretty big piece of news that dropped last week. And so, it's interesting because I think every week there's something new coming from the company, whether on the commercial side or military side. And so it's a pretty exciting time. I mean, I think that announcement in particular just underscores the military dual use case, and whether it's something related to communications, connecting the battlefield, but then also non-communications applications, which some of these awards that the company has received from the SDA, the Space Development Agency, and then also uh, Defense Innovation Unit. Some of those awards are actually non-communications use cases, which can be something around position, navigation, timing, which is GPS, but also electronic warfare, radar, those types of things. So yeah, it's a very exciting time.
Yeah, I think it's really massive. And I just think it kind of validates that the tech works for this military use case, which a lot of
Mhm.
people are just kind of finding out about. Like the Bank of America report didn't even really touch on the defense sector. And a lot of like these like deep dives you do see are just focused on the MNOs and like our partners because that's kind of what it's been advertised to as lately.
Right.
So with this like testing and kind of like showing that it's working good, do you think like what implications do you think this has on like future defense contracts?
I think, as you as you hit each of these milestones, it just opens up more potential work for the company in defense applications. And so I think the company has talked about this in the past where these initial awards, which I think they're currently working, or they have six different awards, some of them which are quite small because they're kind of an initial evaluation phase, but
Mm.
then the the interesting thing is like once you kind of complete these checks and milestones, then some of these awards can start expanding into, hundreds of millions of dollars in potential revenue opportunity. And
Mm.
so I think it's important for investors to understand that we're still kind of early on the evaluation phase of some of these different areas, and whether that's is it the applications that I mentioned before, but then also future things, there's a lot of discussion around the potential for Golden Dome, which could be pretty big. If
Massive.
you look at the RFP, yeah, if you look at the RFP put out for Golden Dome, there's a number of different areas where AST SpaceMobile's satellite technology would be very unique and applicable
Mm,
in addressing those applications. So yeah, it's an exciting time because I think it's kind of hard to quantify what the potential is, but we know it's all out there. And this is just, of course, for the US military, it doesn't encompass, Europe or slash NATO
mhm.
or some other potential countries that are allies of the US. So it's exciting. I think some folks have said it correctly that the defense use case and market opportunity in some is likely going to be bigger than the consumer opportunity in the early
Mm,
stages of this company's rollout of service, and then
mm.
over time, of course, commercial opportunity is gigantic, which I think will dwarf everything else. But um, at least initially, I think probably the material opportunity before we even have a full constellation for commercial service will likely be defense.
Yeah, that's massive, and it is cool
Mhm.
like that we can kind of use these as for testing when we only have a few up. Kind of validates the tech while also bringing in revenue at the same time. So
Yeah, that's right.
with these satellites, I think the biggest thing right now is just getting these up in the air in orbit. So as we kind of
Mhm.
saw last night, it does look like some of these launches are lining up, and does look like we may be shipping the one off to India soon, and then as Katsy pointed out this morning, we might have approval for a Falcon 9 launch. Kind of wanted to hear your thoughts on that, and if you think like those will line up. And like as we kind of discussed last time, like what month these go up doesn't really matter. It's just because in a few years we'll be looking back and just be like, okay, we have them all up. It doesn't matter when. But I think right now, it's kind of seeing mostly on like stock twits the last week is like after this pump, whether it's people who want to get back in or people who shorted, they're screaming, okay, we went up this much, but we haven't launched a satellite this year.
Mm. Yeah, so it's been quite some time since we last launched satellites, which was
Mm,
in September of last year. That's when the five Block 1 satellites went up, and I think the company had they obviously are executing as quickly as they can, but then the new form factor of satellite is different than what's been launched before, and so this new spacecraft it's just taken longer time to develop, which I think on the
mm,
one hand, there are people who are concerned. They're like, well, what if Starlink catches up, or
yeah.
what if there's like a competitive you're at a competitive or you lose this competitive advantage. But I
Mm,
guess I would just say that Starlink has what I believe a flawed, architecture, and
yeah.
but that's the choice that they've taken. And there's perhaps some benefits to that, which was rolling out the service much more quickly. But then
Mm,
there's quite a few cons to doing that. And it appears like they're going to just continue to double down on their architecture, which is going to be repeated in the V3 satellites. But
mm,
going back to launch, I think it's important, and it's kind of in the company's DNA where they want to get things right at the first time. And
very
so,
much.
yeah, so these satellites, we were looking at potentially a May launch, and now realistically, that's going to be probably more like early August, because it's just taken more time.
Mm,
But yes, it was. There was a letter from the company that was sent to the FCC asking for special temporary authority for a license to launch, basically by waiver, launch this satellite and have that approval for FM1 out of India, and they want the decision by July 11th in order to have it shipped by July 12th. And so we may hear back from the FCC by that time or earlier, or it could
mm,
be a little later than that. But yeah, so if that's indeed the timeline and we are able to get the satellite there, then we could be looking at a second half launch in August. And the other bottleneck is ISRO, India Space Research Organization. They have another rocket that they're launching for this other mission, which
mm,
they actually set that mission has been getting delayed, and so it's unclear if like the delays have been at should be put at the feet of the company or if it's actually because of this other mission. This other mission has been getting delayed, and so they finally set a date for that, which is July 18th.
Okay,
So
nice.
so we should, and once that rocket's done, then the launch pad will be free, and then you've got to, once the satellite shipped, you've got to integrate it and put it together, and then put it into a rocket. Um, and so I do think we're probably looking at a launch of first half of July, or sorry, first half of August for
Wow.
FM1. And then the other news that we got today was that SpaceX got a license to start RF testing, or basically communicate with a Block 2 Bluebird satellite in Cape Canaveral. And so this is ahead of that was granted yesterday or the day before. And so that means that the satellites that we send them can be tested for communications before they're actually launched. And so I think
Cool.
um, my expectation is that I think you'll see the next batch. It could be anywhere between 3 to 4 Bluebird satellites, Block 2
Mhm.
satellites. They'll be launched from Cape Canaveral on a Falcon 9, probably sometime in the second half of August. So yeah, it's a pretty exciting time. I mean, we're only a month away from potentially 4 to 5 satellites being launched in August. And so that's great.
Yeah, it's kind of cool. Like it'll like double the amount we have up, and then that's just more testing, research, government use cases, and so on and so forth. This morning, I thought it was funny that good old Tiny Tim was saying, "Oh, the NTIA did not approve this. There's no way we're launching." And then within like 2 minutes, Cook posted a full like explanation saying, "Yeah, we can still launch these and get approval later." We've seen it happen over and over in history, and I think it's just
That's
cool to
right.
see kind of like the space mob like on top of it like that. Like within a minute, he's like dismissed it, and I just think that's really cool. And I think that these lining up is just gonna lead to a more exciting summer. Like the summer got started out with a bang, kind of the price reevaluation coming, and now as we get these up, there's just more room for potential and opportunity here. So now that like the
Right.
stock price is kind of evened out, like from 54 to like 45 ish now, where do you think it goes from here?
I think we could be in a little bit of a consolidation phase. We did
Mm,
see, I think it was like 18 million shares, shares that were short that were covered
mm,
over the month of June. And so I think those certainly contributed to the stock price re-rating higher, which, I'd remind people that had those shares not been shorted, you would expect the stock price, the equilibrium, to have been here anyway, right?
yeah,
Because that's when someone shorts a stock, you're creating more artificial supply. That
mm,
supply has to find a home, and that puts downward pressure on the stock. And so, because those folks covered, now you're seeing the stock where it should have been had those people did not short the
yeah, makes
stock.
sense.
So yeah, I think we're kind of in a consolidation phase, but then with additional news, for example, when the FCC approves the STA to launch FM1, then I think you'll probably see a positive stock price reaction to that. There's also a number of other news, whether the Verizon definitive agreement gets signed, which has taken forever, but
Yeah,
understandably so, just given that they're working closely with their biggest competitor in the U.S.
yeah,
In
true.
partnership with AST SpaceMobile, which is that competitor is AT&T. So that was
Mm,
always going to take more time, but sometimes when you get lawyers involved, things kind of go off the rails.
yeah,
But
right.
but yeah, there's a whole host of news. Putting aside the launch, which both launches, which are big pieces of news,
Mhm,
there's a whole host of other things that potentially could come. I think probably the one thing that perhaps the market is most skeptical of. But I think just based off of space mob due diligence, I think we feel pretty good.
mhm,
Golden Dome, if the big beautiful bill does get passed by the House, then you could see
mhm,
some PR related to Golden Dome start dropping in the next few weeks.
mhm,
Because I think the initial allocation of the $25 billion, quite a bit of that is probably already earmarked for
mhm.
different companies, which is probably why the company has spoke with some level of confidence that
Yeah, right.
they are going to be part of it. So I think to people who are unfamiliar with the story, there that will be a surprise. For people who know the story very closely,
For sure.
it'll be a great hard catalyst that crystallizes a huge and business opportunity. But obviously, you can't hang your hat on that until it's actually done. But yeah, I do think there's room for the stock to continue to appreciate over the
Mhm.
summer as those successful launches and deployments will mean a true start to the initial rollout of commercial service. And so, and then of course the cadence of launching new satellites into space every 30 to 60 days. I think that will be very exciting.
Yeah, that's gonna be so sick. I was just thinking that yesterday, like once we finally got that news, it's like once these start going up, like they're just gonna be going up like cake, like every few months. And like every time it goes up is just more of an opportunity, and I think that's great. And I think like with the I was thinking like kind of the 40s is hopefully the new 20s
Mhm.
where it just kind of bounces around for here, and then as we get more news and updates, it can kind of work its way up from here.
Yeah, I
So
think that's the right way to think about it. Mhm.
for sure. So yeah, let's get into some of these questions. We have a lot of like interesting ones here. So we're gonna start like while it's kind of also recent news. We have from David Rue 4003348. He asked, "Would love to hear your thoughts on the move to redeem the bonds early. How unusual is this, and how likely is it a precursor to a strategic investment?"
Well, usually when you see bonds retired early, and these bonds were in the money. So, as folks may recall, the convertible bonds had a conversion strike of 26.99, but then the company entered into a derivatives transaction where they paid for a call spread, which
Mhm.
then raised that strike price and reduced the dilution from 26.99 to 44.99. And then of course the stock went to like 54, 53.
Yeah,
And so
it's like they had to. Why not?
well, so those convertible bond holders are long, the ARBs, not the
Hmm.
fundamental like long only guys who are taking a view on the company. But the ARBs were long a bond and then they're short stock against that. And
Okay.
so for them, they basically they short on the way up and then they're basically on a full hedge at 45 and higher.
Hmm.
And so they could sit on that because there's still optionality because if the stock goes below 45, then they can cover stock and they
Hmm.
can monetize the volatility. But what was interesting is that the company did retire these bonds early, not even like 6 months from issuance. And so that is peculiar because usually you want to keep like a pretty large issue out there so that investors imagine like you're invested in a stock, but there's only instead of 100 million shares, there's only 100,000 shares you can invest in. Like that's not a very interesting investment because there's not much liquidity if you ever want to buy or sell. There's just no ability to do that, and so you typically want to keep these convertible bond issues or debt issues or anything, these securities, you want to have a decent amount of float out there, right?
Hmm.
So that people can actually trade them if they want to. They want to get in, they want to get out. But to retire half of it early is a bit peculiar. And
Hmm.
they ended up paying a premium. They paid 1 million shares extra on top of the underlying dilution to retire these bonds. And so um, if you look at the economics of what they did, it's not, they are going to save money in terms of a cash interest expense that was going to be paid to the convert holders every year, which was like,
Hmm.
I think, what was that? I forget, 4.25 or 4.75%. Um, but then, they obviously paid stock in order to do that. So you typically would just leave these issues out there, unless you wanted
Hmm.
to raise more money and have a new bond that is at a higher strike, which companies will do. They'll just actually offer to buy back the entire issue and then issue a new one at the same time. But they
Hmm.
didn't do that either here. They just bought half. So that got, I guess, they got me and Kook and others thinking that perhaps they were trying to clean up the balance sheet
For sure.
to potentially bring in new strategic investors in a new convertible debt issue. So, that could be someone like an Amazon or Apple,
Hmm.
or Microsoft or a combination of those. Or it could be, maybe they feel pretty good about their ability to get non-dilutive import-export bank debt, which is XM or IFC debt. And so that could be, you might want to clean up the balance sheet and get some of your, you know, uh, metrics, whether it's like coverage ratios or debt to EBITDA, or which obviously we don't we don't
Yeah.
generate EBITDA today, but we will
Mm,
be in the very near future, as
mm,
we the second half of this year we're going to be uh, you know we're expecting 50 to 75 million of revenue.
right.
And so I think like cleaning up the balance sheet and making room, but only doing half, it is
Mm,
weird. So, and paying up for that too, for that
right.
matter. So I do think they're trying to make some room for strategic investment, whether that, as I mentioned before, are some corporates, or it could be import export debt. The other thing is it could be sovereigns too. So
Mm,
in the past, like we speculated that Saudi Arabia, or Qatar, or any number of these Middle East sovereigns may make a strategic investment, especially if you think about the needs of those countries for connectivity. You have very large
yeah.
geographic areas where, if you really want to provide 100% seamless connectivity, it makes absolutely zero sense to build out terrestrial towers, but
Hmm.
then you could do that very easily by satellite. So perhaps like, one of those players might make a strategic investment as well.
And they have deep pockets over there.
Yeah, they have deep pockets. And then I think it was probably something hard for the company to contemplate when we were at $2, because of
Yeah.
the amount of potential influence a party like that could have.
Yeah.
Just
Right.
investing even $100 million is a pretty big pro forma ownership, even if you're using convertible debt that has a
Mm,
premium conversion premium. Whereas now, we have our market caps at what, 15 or 16 billion.
mm,
And so having a strategic investor make a $200 million investment is not, it doesn't really
right.
impact
Mm,
ownership level. And the reason why I mention this is like, for whether it's strategic or sovereign, you might have concerns from other strategics that are part of the company now, or
mhm.
if it's a sovereign, if it's US government that's, hey, we're using you guys for defense applications. If you have a
Yeah.
sovereign investor come
Makes
in and
sense.
say, hey, we want
Yeah.
20% control,
Hmm.
that's not going to work. Whereas now,
Yeah.
it's if they invest a few $100 million, it's just a few percent. It's not going to have any influence over the company.
Yeah. Makes sense to me. Appreciate the clarification because people who aren't really into finances, like I saw that move and I'm like, okay, we're saving on interest, and that's what I can kind of wrap my head around. So it's kind of
Mhm.
good to hear the deeper kind of implications of that. So our next question, it's Nuke to Astra. He asked, "What has surprised Anpanman the most in terms of what the company has direct control of in the last 6 months?" So like he
Mhm.
said, example, their communication performance, etc. What was not on his radar, and how does that affect his thinking on company trajectory?
Uh, that's a good question. Actually, let me go. I put together a list of things this past week, so let me just review some of these things. Let's see. I think, well, one big surprise was the company hosting FCC Chair Brendan Carr and
Yeah.
Senator Ted Cruz. That was a big surprise.
Yeah. Right.
I think we all made a good faith assumption that Brendan Carr would be supportive of U.S. companies that were driving global leadership
Hmm.
in communications. And the bears slash guys who traffic and FUD would tell you that when Elon Musk joined the administration, that was going to be a headwind for the company.
Yeah.
But then
Right.
when we saw, this was like by the way, pre blow up of Trump and
Yeah.
Elon's
Right.
relationship. But
Yeah.
when we saw Brendan Carr and Ted Cruz show up at Midland headquarters and give full throated support
Hmm.
of the company, that was a big surprise, and I
Right.
think that went a really long way in putting to rest a lot of the potential, like, Elon Musk influence
Hmm.
concerns, which I'd point out, like, Elon Musk, he's clearly a successful guy and has done well in all his endeavors. And but I think it's important to understand, like, he's not a guy that, I don't think he has a reputation of trying to beat people kind of in a slimy way.
Yeah.
Obviously, like he's good at replicating things and
Yeah.
getting into businesses that are
y-
successful, but I think he does believe in the merits of competing on a somewhat of a level playing field. And
for
so
sure.
um, they've put out their solution with Starlink direct to cell, and there's some issues there, but they're going to do their best, and I
Hmm.
think over time, as we all acknowledge, like I think Starlink will come up with something that's pretty competitive and decent,
Hmm.
because there's a lot of smart people there and they'll figure it out. But then
Yeah.
I think also people's concerns that somehow there would be something nefarious going on. I think it's important to kind of separate Starlink from SpaceX, right? Like
For sure. Yeah.
Starlink is a competitor, and have at it. Like I think competition is good, but when it comes to
Yeah.
SpaceX, like they're a separate arm. Their business is to get as many cargoes into space as possible and do that profitably. And I think when you look at, someone had mentioned today where they're like, how do you reconcile the fact that Starlink is complaining about AST SpaceMobile in the FCC docket, but then at the same time SpaceX is getting a license to do RF
Yeah.
testing with Bluebirds because they're going to launch them. And I would just say, like, that's how you should view it. Like they operate as two
Hmm.
separate entities, and yes, they have the same parent, and at the same time, like there's the motivations of both are a bit different, right? And
Right.
if you
Yeah.
look back in history, SpaceX has delivered cargo, or will be delivering cargo for Telesat, Globalstar,
Hmm.
Iridium, OneWeb, um, you know, Kuiper. Like these are all competitors, and
Right.
but SpaceX has a profit motive. They want to get
Mhm.
cargoes into space because they can't just take Starlink cargo to space. If they do that, then that doesn't bring in cold hard cash. That
Yeah. Right.
that does bring in an investable asset. The satellites then
Mhm.
generate revenue over time and cash flow, but that takes a really long time. That's a huge upfront investment. What SpaceX needs is actual cash to come in through the door, which means
Right.
launching satellites for the U.S. government, other governments, commercial customers. And so I think it's important to understand, like, AST SpaceMobile is the largest commercial customer outside of the U.S. government,
Hmm.
Starlink,
Yeah.
and Kuiper. After that, there's a severe drop off, and
Very much.
AST is in that same category. We're going to be paying what will likely be over a billion and a half dollars of launch fees to the
Yeah.
market, right? And so do you want to do you want to screw around with that and not be part of it, or do you want to
Right.
be viewed as a competitive and trustworthy partner? And so I think if the fudsters have you believe that SpaceX is going to somehow sabotage AST
Mm.
SpaceMobile, then guess who's not going to be happy about that? Other customers, and also the U.S.
Yeah.
government. The U.S. government is now a a key customer for AST SpaceMobile. So you're telling me that
Yeah.
SpaceX is going to sabotage things that the U.S. government is trying to do? Like it doesn't make
Yeah.
sense.
That's not
So
really
so I
legal.
think, yeah, there's something that we have
But
called the antitrust
yeah.
laws here, the Sherman Act, the Clayton Act. There's, you name it.
Hmm.
You can, the FTC and the DOJ will be on top of them like flies on shit. So
Right.
I think it's important for people to understand that. But yeah, that's a long-winded way of saying
Hmm.
that was a big surprise having them there. I think the other big surprise, of course, was doing the $460 million convertible deal, which
Yeah.
then in hindsight was like great. Um,
Hmm.
and of course, see now that I'm like going through a list, there's like even more.
Yeah. It just
I think
lines up.
Legato. I take all that other stuff back. I think Legato was like the biggest thing, right? Because
Yeah.
Legato,
Massive.
when that got announced, that's truly a transformational deal. The spectrum there, as we've talked about, is probably
Well,
worth more than the current company's market cap. And
yeah. A
so,
lot of people don't even understand it yet, which is like crazy. It's like it's
yeah,
still
that's
kind
right.
of. It hasn't even like technically fully been approved yet because we're still waiting on like the FCC. But like
Yeah,
the fact
yeah,
that that's still kind of there and people don't really understand, it's like this is going to end up being insane,
yeah, that's right. I think that's the right characterization. It's going to be insane.
right?
Yeah,
It's really exciting. So, kind of moving on from there, this one I am curious kind of for your answer to this because
yeah.
but APC David he asks, what are some things that you look for? Parentheses red flags if any that would consider you to sell this stock.
Uh, let's see, red flags that would that to me that would well, if let's say if the Bell sold his entire stake tomorrow, like that would be a
Yeah,
red flag.
yeah,
But
right,
as
yeah,
we've known, he's held he's held his entire stake this entire time. He did monetize a little bit of it last year. I think it was like for single digit percentages, and it wasn't even like a straight sale. He actually entered into a collar transaction, and
hmm
so was able to generate some cash there. But yeah, I think like if you saw en masse like all insiders selling
yeah, right,
their complete holdings, then yes, that's an obvious red flag. But we've
hmm
seen over the last few weeks, Abel clearly he hasn't sold anything, but then some of the
crazy,
key executives have sold like 5% of their
hmm
holdings, which I think it's important to understand that these execs get re-upped equity grants every year,
yeah,
so it does make sense for them to sell some. And they've been living on pretty meager salaries. Like
hmm
if you have a family of five and you're making you're a single family, you're a single income earner of
hmm
$250,000. Like in a lot of places, that's actually that can go far a long way.
hmm
But if you're living in a major city,
right,
that actually it's pretty tight. And so,
hmm
especially if your loved one is working at a factory floor
hmm
or is out getting deals and you don't see them, you have to hire a
yeah,
lot of help.
true,
So I think monetizing in that regard is okay. But let's
hmm
see, red flags. If AST started like buying ads, it's the Super Bowl or doing stupid shit with their money, then
yeah,
that would be a problem. But we know like this company is super scrappy and they count every dollar and they try to make everyone
yeah,
count
good,
every dollar spent count. And so if you saw like some of their key MNO partners drop them, like if AT&T came
yeah,
out tomorrow
right,
and said, "Okay, we're done. We just don't believe in this anymore," that would be a big red flag. Trying to think.
hmm
Yeah, I mean those are kind of, but they're kind of obvious, right? Like
yeah, right, the biggest,
if you
yeah,
if you saw MNOs leaving the company and joining Starlink, that would be a problem. But we've seen the
yeah,
opposite, right? Like we've
yeah,
seen
exactly,
Starlink since August 2022 signed 9 MNOs, of which less than half of those are MNOs of consequence, and meaning like in terms of size, whereas AST SpaceMobile is probably closer. I've kind of guesstimated that it's 53, but it's probably
hmm
like 55 MNOs, and that's covering
huge,
well over 3.2 billion subscribers. And so I don't know. Like I think as you follow this company, if you started to see activity plateau or
hmm
employee headcount go down, then those would be concerns. But with this company, every week there's like new announcements that are
yeah,
material, and then the
good,
headcount just continues to ramp up. Like I think
right,
if you follow LinkedIn, it's just been a straight but measured ascendancy in terms of employees working at the company. And
hmm
so it's not like they're doubling the workforce every month,
yeah,
but
right,
they're clearly bringing quite a few folks in because they
hmm
need to ramp up production and build out the organization to support multiple commercial customers, but also what's going to be defense
hmm
um, and government customers. So I think we've seen what are the red flags I'm looking for? Those are some of them, but we're seeing the exact
hmm
opposite of that.
yeah, right.
So I feel pretty good.
Yeah, right. Me too. So,
Yeah,
this one from Call Me Kyle, kind of going off of like how you were talking about them spending money on ads, which they don't really do because we kind of rely on our MNOs to kind of spread the message of connecting the
that's
unconnected.
right.
So they ask, do you see Verizon and AT&T picking up the advertising more after T-Mobile and Bad Santa's commercial, which I thought was funny.
Yeah, so they AT&T and Verizon, they have done commercials for AST Space Mobile, but it's
hmm
been pretty measured, right? Like I think
Yeah.
the one I think we all remember is AT&T doing commercial with Ben Stiller at the Masters, right? For
hmm
golf. That was an important commercial. And then I think Verizon did a commercial, although for satellite connectivity, although it was primarily texting,
hmm
which is more the stuff that they're offering today is the very limited text messaging service from Skylo.
Yeah.
But I think those two players are pretty conservative in what they do, and so
hmm
I don't think you'll see earnest, advertising of AST Space Mobile service until the service is actually launched,
Yeah. Right. Right.
and
At least
or
made
we're
up.
on the cusp of it. Like let's
hmm
say. I don't know, like let's say 3/4 of the satellite constellation is up and they were just waiting for the last quarter to get up there, then you'll probably
Mm,
start seeing them when you have a line of sight and high confidence that commercial service is pretty close, then I think
hmm
you'll start seeing them market interest to end customers.
for sure. Yeah, that commercial with all our competitors have 10. I remember just like watching that like before anyone posted on Twitter, and I had to like rewind it. I'm like, no way.
Yeah. Yeah, the T-Mobile commercial with Billy Bob Thornton, the
Mm-hmm,
funny thing about that is they did take a dig at us.
mm,
And there's there is a space mop who works at T-Mobile, and there's been like some internal meetings that
yeah,
where they've
they're
talked about
worried.
they they basically dismiss what AT&T and Verizon are doing because
Mm-hmm,
they have more satellites, which I think, as we all know, means nothing if your satellites don't have capabilities. And so I think that line of reasoning is going to come back, or that type of
mm-hmm.
marketing can come back to bite them because
Yeah, for
they're
real.
now talking about rolling out data sometime later, or voice and data sometime later this year. But I just don't see how they're going to be able to
3G.
get there. Yeah, I don't see how they're going to be able to get there if they can't even provide, sporadic texting, and then on top of that, they're trying to get all these app developers to basically develop dumbed down apps that
Yeah,
can
that's pretty
work on
wild.
3G data rates, which is pretty bad. Um,
It's like
but
stepping
yeah,
backwards.
yeah, it's stepping backwards. And the funny thing is, like, that Billy Bob Thornton commercial, he's currently in a series called Landman, which is about
Mm,
like oil wildcat guys in the Permian Basin. But what's funny is that it's actually based on, or the story is based in Midland, Texas, which is where we're
that's
headquartered.
that's
And
yeah,
so
that's hilarious.
I thought that was, when
Yeah,
you talk
right.
about competition and having fun, I thought that was a good dig by them,
Yeah, for
which
sure.
is good. Like, I think ultimately, like, this market is big enough for two players, maybe three, and I think Starlink knows that as well. And so having some fun while competing, like, that's good.
Yeah, exactly. It's healthy. So this next question from Jer Matasso. He said, "Do you have any concerns about scalability of the service? I mean, do you think tech will work fine with millions of smartphones connected simultaneously?"
Yeah, I think so. Let's break that down. Let's say in the US you have, you know, just to make it simple, for AT&T and Verizon, let's say that there's 150 million potential subscribers, right? Because the
Mhm,
US has maybe 350 million people, and then assume they each have a third of the market, so it's like 200 million, and then, or less, and then out of those people, how many people have mobile phones, versus like kids, right? Kids don't have
mhm,
mobile phones. Maybe they have watches, but let's just say like there's 150 million subscribers in the US, and let's say they take 10% of that just to start. So
mhm.
15 million potential subscribers. Like, I think what people have to understand is, like, there's not going to be 15 million people on the network at the same time,
Yes,
all streaming
exactly.
like Netflix.
Yeah.
This is supplemental coverage, at least initially, for
Mhm,
the first block two Bluebirds. They're going to be providing supplemental coverage to the terrestrial network. And so when you're out of a dead zone, that's when you're going to connect. And then, and if you can imagine, like, just in terms of probabilities, how many people are going to be in a dead zone at the same time? Not that many
right.
people, right? Not that many people are going to be hiking in a national park that is out of coverage, or there could be quite a few people in a dead zone, let's say in Long Island on the beach, right?
Mhm,
Um, but it's not going to be everything all at once. It's going to be just a few people at a time.
mhm,
And
makes sense.
so then those people will have to share the same cell beam, which could have anywhere initially of up to 120 megabits of peak data
Mhm,
throughput, right? And so if that's the case, like, most people, again, like, if you're at the beach or you're hiking, you're not watching Netflix. You're texting sporadically, you're checking things, web
yeah.
pages from time to time. You might be uploading something from it to Instagram, or
Checking
looking at some content.
AST stock price.
Yeah, yeah. And I think, for me, someone who works outside the home, like, I'll bring my laptop and I need to have a data stream, which is,
Mhm,
to Bloomberg or E-Trade, and that's about it. Like, I might do some texting, but nothing beyond that, maybe emails. So I think, yeah, can the tech scale? Yes, I think it
mhm,
will. And initially, if there's a lot of people on the network, it's just like, for example, being on your broadband cable network in your neighborhood, right? The more people use it, like the peak times, your speed's going to drop a bit because everything has to
Mhm.
get throttled down. And that's going to be the same here. Like there's going to be times when if you just happen to be with 100 other people in the same dead spot in the same cell, like the performance is going to get throttled down.
Yeah, makes sense.
But that's going to change over time because like as you add more bluebird satellites and the network gets densified, and then you also have the ability to do massive MIMO, which is inter the 2 to 3 different satellites are all beaming you signal and are able to share the load. Then the speeds go up. And so, but yeah, but that is a key question. I mean, we'll get some sense when once the constellation is up or some part of it is
Hmm.
up, what the potential throughput rates are, and what the performance is. If you have one person, you have 50 people, you have 100 people in the same cell,
Hmm.
it'll be interesting to see. But I think the other thing is like folks have to understand that the the competition in that type of environment is the alternative is nothing, right? So
Exactly.
either you have connectivity and it's like pretty good, or it's really good, or it's nothing. And so I
Yeah.
think most people will take
Yeah.
really good or pretty good
You're right.
or very good versus nothing. It's like when I'm on a plane, if I it's like, oh God, I got to connect to Boingo and I pay $30 and
Yeah.
it's literally streaming like a few hundred K and it's very
Yeah. Pretty
sporadic.
slow.
It's like, well, at least I'm getting the ability to do some things. It's not
Something.
great.
Yeah.
But if the alternative is not do anything and not have any connectivity, where if you have to be connected, then that's no alternative. And you would
Hmm.
take even Apple sporadic or Starlink messaging, just text messaging, you
Yeah.
would probably take that over nothing, right?
Where you
So
got to hold it to the satellite. I always like at the
yeah,
bottom of the T-Mobile ads, it's like be outside and pointed toward. I just picture like those people like holding their phones up to the sky still, like looking for a satellite.
yeah, and I think that will improve. But the other
Yeah,
thing
exactly.
to know about Starlink is that you've got they're utilizing 1.9 gigahertz spectrum, which is
Mhm.
mid-band spectrum, and that doesn't have the same propagation coverage, um, you know, uh, abilities as low band spectrum, which is lower frequency, so 600 to 900 megahertz. That can go through walls, multiple walls, and so that's what AST is using with carriers, whereas Starlink is using T-Mobile's 1.9 gigahertz, and
Mhm.
so that is why you might be able to get it through like a car, but then
Mhm.
it's unlikely that's going to work in house, or that's why you
Yeah.
probably have to point at the sky to get it to
Hmm.
work.
Makes sense. So this next question we have from Katsy. He said, "I like to
He's asking
hear."
me a question.
Yeah.
Okay.
He said, "I like to hear Anpanman reflect on the pool of human resources available in the retail community compared to that available to a legacy bank slash professional institutional investors. How they compare and who has the edge in analysis because he has seen both worlds from inside."
It depends on who's in your group, right? I think
Mhm.
retail definitely has better resources because
Mhm.
it now if it's just you and a friend, then you've got a problem. But if you've got
Yeah.
like several friends, if you have a Catsy in your group, then that's like a game
Yeah.
changer,
Right.
right? Because that
For
I
real.
think his technical acumen, and there's a few other people too. Like I think from a regulatory standpoint, there's a few new Spaceball members, whether it's like
Mhm.
Dad of Girls or Dad Girl, or Yield of Parts or some of these other new members. They bring a different perspective and what seems to be a wealth of knowledge in terms of regulatory and
Mhm.
also technical. So yeah, compared to a bank or a let's say a hedge fund, like if you're a portfolio manager and you have 2 analysts or 3 analysts,
Mhm.
your knowledge is going to be either very sector specific or you're a generalist, and then you're just leveraging outside research resources in order to get smart, which is like expert networks and things like that. And so there, being an investor on the public side, you or basically, you're dangerous to know a little bit about everything, but you're a master of nothing, right?
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
so, but if you have the ability to understand risk reward and market sentiment and how to take
Mhm.
advantage of that, then it can be very powerful, or you can be a successful investor. Whereas I think if you're looking at the ability to drill down on single names, like it's incomparable. I think I
Hmm.
think for retail, like we've seen with SpaceMob, like having people from multiple disciplines, whether that's finance, accounting, legal, technical, production, any host of things.
Hmm.
It's great. Even like people who do advertising or marketing, it's like,
Hmm.
hey, so if you're trying to figure out, um, what research terms people are using, or like SEO type of questions, like
Hmm.
having resident experts answer that for you, is super helpful. And so that might be relevant, for example, to an ad tech company that you might be investing in. So I think like
Makes sense.
I think retail definitely has a bigger edge because you do have a lot of, if you pull together the right people, you have very deep experts of
Hmm.
specific areas, and you're able to also analyze a situation from those different disciplines. Whereas as a finance person, you're very limited in terms of
Hmm.
what you know and what you don't know. And so I think it's helpful. I think retail definitely has an edge as long as that group is like motivated, they've got
Hmm.
skin in the game, and they're honest with each other, and you have people from different walks of life who can fill different gaps.
Yeah, very interesting, and I agree. Especially just viewing like this the space mob kind of as a whole, just seeing how much knowledge comes out of us like every week, and just all these people like posting stuff and analysis, and like it really helps you kind of, if you are new to this stock, it really helps you kind of get an understanding. Where I
Mhm.
remember when I first like started investing in this company way back, I was like, but like before like all Catsie's posts, I was like, I like this is gonna be a really cool company that changes the world, but like I have no idea how this works. Like I have no idea how a satellite
Right,
is gonna connect to a phone. But then
right,
like as you see kind of how it works, you're like, okay, this starts like connecting the pieces in your head and just makes you overall more confident.
right.
So this next one from Yumbi, they asked, can you dive into the satellite tech and what makes them superior to Starlinks?
Yeah, so I just try to make differentiate between the two at a very
Yeah.
high level. I mean, we have
Hmm.
a very large phased array, which is, the next generation is going to be 15 meters by 15 meters, and that's a high powered phased array. If you can imagine, there's trade offs when you want to connect to a phone on the Earth
Hmm.
from space. You can either you can do what the legacy guys did, which is make a small satellite because it's really expensive to get. Back then, call it 20, 30 years, it was really expensive to get a kilogram of weight into space. So they made small satellites, but then they made a big phone here on Earth, which is why you
Hmm.
would see those huge clunky Iridium phones with this massive satellite, or sorry, massive antenna with a massive battery.
Uh-huh.
And that connection that they tried to make was like, it was decent, but it wasn't great. And so maybe you could get at most a few hundred kilobytes per second data transfer rate, right? But the key
Hmm.
thing is like it worked, and you could do voice, which was a key
Yeah.
key application back then. Fast forward to today, consumer electronics, have brought down the cost of manufacturing electronics, and then the cost of launch has come down precipitously. Like it's gone from a few, I don't know, well over $100,000 a kilogram to, if I think it's like, we're eventually going to get to a few $1,000s, or even
Hmm.
less. And so now you can put up a bigger satellite, and it's not as simple as that. You actually have to, the way that AST SpaceMobile was able to put out this massive phased array is that they fold it up in a very ingenious way that it will
Hmm.
fit into a standard rocket fairing, right? And so AST has developed this technology where, we're going to leverage the consumerization of electronics, like the satellite panel, sorry, the solar panels that we use are going to be relatively inexpensive, but we're going to harden them for
Hmm.
space. You have to harden things for the extreme temperature changes, from going in space. It can be really hot because you're exposed to the sunlight, or it can be really cold, and we know anything that's exposed to those extreme changes are going to get beaten up pretty bad.
Hmm.
There's also radiation as well, but like, let's take what is near commercial grade, or perhaps commercial grade, like solar panels. Let's harden them, and be able to use them for these satellites. And so through vertical integration, they're able to make a satellite relatively cheaply, but it has this massive phased array, that can talk directly to your unmodified phone. So instead of beefing up the phone that you have today, we're just going to take that phone, which is low power, and we're going to put this massive antenna in space that has
Mm.
power. It's going to be able to not only beam down signals to you, but it's going to be able to hear what you want to send back, right? Because
That's cool.
your cell phone, the power it transmits is very low. And
Mm.
so Starlink is taking a different approach. They're going to put up uh, thousands of satellites, which have a small phased array, and they're hoping to, we're floating our satellites in low Earth orbit, which is going to be anywhere between 500 to 700 kilometers above Earth, whereas they're
Mm.
floating their satellites at very low Earth orbit, which is like 350 kilometers. So they're going to make up some of the difference by being closer to Earth. But then, in order to get coverage, you have to fly way more satellites, right?
Mm.
If you can imagine, like the further you go away, you cover more space. The closer you get to Earth, you cover less space. And
Mm.
so they're flying at a lower orbit. They're going to have more satellites flying around. They also, architecture-wise, they're putting the brains of how the satellite communicates with your phones. They're putting the brains in each satellite, and so each satellite requires a lot of power and processing to do that. Whereas most of the processing brains that we're putting in our satellites are actually going to be on the ground with the MNO partners network. And so
Mm.
if you can imagine like the call switching, handovers, like translating all your data into packets that are ultimately going to go onto the phone operator's network and managing all those devices, that all happens on the ground. It doesn't happen at the satellite level. What our satellites do is they take cell phone signals and they take all these and then they basically put them together and they beam it down to Earth. And then you have what is equivalent of a base station, which is the brains of a cell tower, doing all the managing on Earth, right? And
Mm.
so it's a very different architecture choice. What our satellites do, however, which is quite different than what Starlink is doing. So Starlink is kind of they're beaming signals, and as the satellite moves, each of the beams travel with the satellite. Imagine like they're fixed
Yeah.
beams, right? Whereas our satellites actually are smart, where they have a phased array that's able to put fixed beams on Earth. So imagine like
Mm.
you have a satellite overhead, it can put a specific beam on you in your phone, and over its call it 10 to 15 minutes of orbit over you,
Mm.
it can fix that beam on you and make sure that your call is consistent and it will
Mm.
stay there. And then when it's about almost out of view for you, it will then hand it off to another satellite who will fix the beam
Mm.
on you and continue that data transfer.
That's cool.
For Starlink, they have fixed beams, so as the satellite travels over you, it will cover you for about 3 to 4, maybe 5 minutes, I think,
Mm-hmm.
and then it has to hand it off to somebody else. And but under that model, you have to have a ton of satellites to do that,
Right.
which then causes, there's a whole host of issues, but one of them is power issues, right? Because your phone
Mm-hmm.
each time is always looking for a new satellite to talk to, and so the power requirements are going to be higher than what AST is doing. But the important thing is like having the ability to beam fixed cells on Earth allows you to more accurately place place data, data capacity where you need it. So, for example, if there's a lot of people in a specific area that need more data, you might put more beams in that area,
Mm-hmm.
right? Versus a satellite that just has a fixed beam where it's basically serving wherever it's going, right? And then
Mm-hmm.
the other thing is like because you're able to project fixed beams, you can more accurately manage service between borders, right? Or areas
Yeah.
of coverage. And so one of the things that AST SpaceMobile can do is that they can be very intricate in putting down beams of service in Europe, which has a lot of borders which are very close to one another, the countries.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, you 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 avoid the potential for interference issues. Whereas in a architecture like Starlink, which has beams that are continually crossing the country, you basically have to turn them on and turn them off at the right time.
Mm-hmm.
And those beams are much bigger. I think Starlink has now I'm forgetting, but I think their beam size is like over 50 kilometers in diameter, whereas ours are I think 24, 25. I'll have to go back and look, but
Mm-hmm.
um, we have smaller, precise beams that have more data throughput in each beam. Each beam will probably have, or a peak stated speed of 120 megabits per beam. So that's to be shared with all the users in that beam, whereas Starlink, I think, is currently at 7 megabits per cell, which is very low. But of course, they're looking to improve that. But yeah, those are the key differences. I mean,
Hmm.
they have processing on board, but then their network operates basically as a separate network from the carrier's network. The satellites don't project precise, tiny beams, and they, so it's less accurate, and there's not as much capacity. We actually do our processing off board, so that's at the network core down on the ground. Um, but we're able to serve more users. We can do more coverage. We have more precise beams that are smaller, and there's more data throughput for each beam. We can also you can navigate borders or areas where you want coverage, where you don't want coverage. It's more precise. So those are some of the key differences. But I think um, if you want to learn more, there's various tweet threads that we have on on Twitter
Yeah,
explaining
yeah,
this.
right.
But yeah, these are two very fundamentally different
Mm,
approaches, which I think candidly the gives AST SpaceMobile a big advantage in
for
terms
sure.
of really serving its customers.
Yeah, definitely sounds it. So we had like three ones kind of about launches.
Hmm.
Some of them kind of angry. We already kind of covered that in the beginning. This was probably before these came in before kind of like we saw these start to unfold.
Hmm.
So we're just gonna skip to this last one here. It's kind of a fun one. So this is from
Yeah.
Puzzling Mind HQ. They say, does AST exhibit such low effort communication with retailers, investors, and the general public? Also, is the company's sales department so ineffective that its 50 plus partnerships yield no prepayment or deals with cash attached? Is it this technology
Yeah.
still unproven to the other mobile network operators and government, or is there simply no demand?
So let's see. The first question, PR. So I think if you were an investor 4 or 5 years ago, when the company was putting out PR maybe once every few months,
Yeah,
then I don't
right.
know if you would have survived. Whereas the company now is, it
Yeah,
seems like every week
yeah,
there's
right.
PR that's coming out. But I think it's important to know, like, this company is not a PR machine. They are focused
Mm,
on execution and getting the real
exactly.
shit done. If you want a PR machine, go invest in some of these scammy companies that put out PR, but there's no actual there's no content
Right.
or material uh,
Just for fun.
events that are happening behind that PR.
Yeah.
But to the question of why isn't the company doing a better job in marketing? At the end of the day, like, the marketing is up to the MNO partners, right? This company is a super whole. It's not in their scope to go market AST Space Mobile to the end user. That's going to be up to AT&T and T and Verizon. And the reason why that is that they own the end user, and it's up to them to figure out how they want to market to their customer. Do they want to offer all the services? Do they want to offer day passes? Do they want to do it as a premium part of a premium plan, or they do it a monthly subscription? It's totally up to them, right? And they get 50% or less of the revenue, and we get 50% or more of the revenue. The question about, like, why haven't we signed more uh, partnerships? Well, first of all, we've gone from 13 partnerships with carriers, or maybe it was like low teens, all the way to 53, and that's over the span of, I guess it's like 4 years. So that's a lot. And we're not talking like small bit players. We're talking about really large global mobile network operators. Um, if the question is more geared towards, like, why won't we
Yeah.
sign more definitive agreements with commercial prepayments? Because it's not time to do that. We have signed the ones that we want so far, which is Vodafone, AT&T, and T, and Verizon,
Hmm.
and of course Google. But I think it's important to understand how the economics and negotiations work, right? Like, if I didn't have a service, if I came to you today and said, "Hey, I'm going to develop this great service, but it's not launched yet. I don't have anything to show you. Why don't you pay me some money up front in
Hmm.
exchange for signing up, guaranteed service?" You would probably offer me 10 cents on the dollar for that type of
Yeah.
service, something that's in the future and on the come, right? It's a very different conversation if I come to you later and I'm like, "Hey, I've got Verizon and Vodafone and AT&T who've already paid me money. They gave me prepayments, and I've got 52 partnerships or 53 partnerships, and now I'm looking to lock in commercial agreements.
Mm-hmm.
You can go to the front of the line depending on how much you want to offer, or you can wait. You can pay us less and you can be kind of middle of the pack, or you can turn on service later, right? You can
Mm-hmm.
offer us nothing, but we'll work with you. But because you didn't pay us something up front, like you will be at the back of the line, right? So then
Makes sense.
that conversation is very different. And by the way, then that salesperson also says like, oh, by the way, we're working with the U.S. government. We've got like funding is secured. Like there's no issues. We've already got let's just say, I don't know, three-quarters of the constellation up, and we're about to kick off service. Like,
Mm-hmm.
what is that worth to you?
Yeah, right.
You'd probably be paying not 10 cents on the dollar. You wouldn't be paying a dollar on the dollar. You'd probably try to offer like $2, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because you're like, shit, this is going to happen. This is happening.
Right.
Everybody's signed up, and I need to get a commercial deal done before my competitors do.
Yeah, very much.
And so that's why you don't, um, your ability to extract higher rents improves as the business is built out and
Makes
more
sense.
milestones are hit. So that's why you wait.
Mm-hmm.
If you do that stuff too early, you're basically giving away things that you didn't have to, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's the philosophy that I think the company has, had in terms of their approach.
That's smart. Yeah, I never really looked at it that way because looking at it, like this is a very rare technology, and the company definitely kind of understands this and kind of wants to hold on to it versus just handing it away, like you said.
That's right.
So I think that wraps it up for the questions. If you have any for me, I'd be happy to take them. Just
No, I think, all right, let me just take a look at I don't know if there were any people who followed up with questions from the post earlier.
I think that's yeah. I had a bunch about launches, but it's just funny because some of them were pretty angry. They're like, "Why is there no launch calendar? Are they behind?" But
Yeah,
it
I
said,
think, well, I think it's important people recognize like everything's a trade-off, right? So
mhm,
you can just like, SpaceX and Starlink, or Starlink, not SpaceX, but Starlink wanted to get their service out, get the marketing buzz. I think
mhm.
they're obviously, Elon was like, I want to be quick to the punch,
Yeah,
and
like first.
he announced something as quickly as he could ahead of
Mhm.
Apple's Global Star announcement and our Blue
Yeah.
Walker 3 launch in September of 2022.
Mhm.
And because of that, like they basically came out with a half-baked solution and they rushed it out. And
Right.
we've seen, like you can look at reviews. The reviews are very
Mhm.
what's a kind word? I mean, the reviews have been bad because like the service just doesn't work and it's
Yeah.
inconsistent. That said, like it is a service. It has some utility. Is it better than what Apple provides? Probably not. But is it going to be at the point where they can do voice and data? Well, I think that remains to be seen.
Mhm.
But or you can go our route where going back to Starlink, they acquired a small company called Swarm, which did small CubeSat Internet of Things, and they
Mhm.
used
Okay.
some of that technology to basically that was the underpinnings for what they're doing now.
Mhm.
Or you can do what Abel has done, which is go back to 2017 and build this company from first principles. Like this is what we're going to do, and we're going to do it. We're going to do it the right way. And they took years and years to develop the technology, and even today, like what we view as what the service will be today is going to be different. 10 years from now, right? Because
Mhm.
right now we have the Block 2 Bluebirds, which is a no, third generation design of the technology design, but they're working on the fourth and fifth and sixth generation too, which is going to
Yeah.
improve
Crazy.
capacity and all a host of other things. And so, but to do those things and to do them right, we're not like SpaceX. We're not launching rockets on a whim,
Mhm.
figuring out break things fast and then try to fix them and then go again.
Yeah. Right.
Um, our customers don't like that, or we have MNOs that want a service that's rock solid from the beginning,
Mhm.
and so we have a different approach to engineering. We're going to do things in a smart, savvy way that's cost effective, but we're also going to do it and try to be right the first time and every time. And
Mhm.
so with that standard of approach, like it's going to take time and you're going to have stumbling blocks. And I remember Blue Walker 3 when they were initially supposed to launch it. I think they found some issues with some of the um, materials that they used. for the satellite. And then they went back to the drawing board and they ended up using different materials. I think this was for the microns. And that wasn't publicly out there, but just based off our due diligence, like we kind of figured it out. And it's like, well,
Yeah.
good. They went, they
Yeah,
they
like
tested
smart.
something in an environment chamber. It didn't work out. So then they decided to go fix it and do something different, and it worked out. And so when they did launch their Blue Walker 3 satellite, which took longer, it went up there and it worked, and everything performed as expected. So I think just starting with the premise that space is hard, like whatever you
Yeah.
do down here is hard, but if you do it in space, it's going to be 100 times harder,
Yeah, way harder.
because you got to account for all those factors. Like that's why that's why these things take time, and so you don't want to rush them. Because if you do rush them, like there's plenty of examples in history, whether Inmarsat, Loral, I think it was a Telesat satellite, I forget. But there's been satellites that either failed or even rockets that blew up with satellites on them.
Hmm.
And that's something you don't want to have
Yeah,
happen.
no.
And so you want to eliminate all those factors. I think people have gotten used to SpaceX, pumping things out quickly and breaking them
Hmm.
and be like, okay, we'll go again.
Yeah,
Um,
right. We'll just
if
launch them
this
more.
com Yeah, this company isn't, that's not their DNA, and they're not going to do that because they value the resources they have,
Hmm.
and there's not an infinite amount of money.
Exactly.
And so yeah, if people complain about the company having to raise money, it's like, well, if you want to get things done the right way, then you want them to use the money properly instead of
Wasting. Yeah.
let's go put up something that we know is going to be a mistake, but we'll just fix it in the next iteration.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
for sure. I think kind of the message there is just kind of with this in the space, and especially what AST is doing, that like slow and steady just wins the race, especially when it's something this like revolutionary of a tech, because you want to get it
yeah, it's
right.
never
And
been done before.
yeah, so you want to get it right. You want to prove that we can provide this high speed service and not have be spending hundreds of millions of dollars putting faulty satellites up in space. And
That's right.
I think it's a great approach. And I think that kind of wraps it up. That's a good way to kind of end it. Looking kind of forward to these next few months. This summer is about to be crazy. Like once these satellites are up and people kind of starts to eliminate that bear case of, oh, they haven't launched a satellite in a year. What's wrong? And I think
Mhm.
moving forward, we're in a good spot right now.
Okay, great. Yeah, yeah, it was good catching up, and
For sure.
yeah, we can do this again in the future if
Well,
there's more questions. I'm sure
yeah,
there'll always be, but happy to
yeah,
do
for
so.
sure.
Right,
Yeah.
enjoyed it.
Thank you. Thanks for hopping on, and we look forward to doing another one with you.
Okay, sounds
All
good.
right.
Take care.
Take care, man. See ya.
Bye.